Simon joined OpenGI in July 2019 and has overall responsibility for setting the business strategy and liaising with investors. He has over 30 years experience in the financial services and software industries, and most recently as UK CEO at IRES. Prior to this, Simon led tech firm Avello to sale at an impressive 15 times multiple earnings and has held a number of senior leadership positions with Aviva. So thank you for joining us today, Simon, and over to you.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you everybody for joining me this afternoon. What I would like to be able to do, so Danny, if we could move on one slide. What I'd like to be able to do over the next 30 minutes is bring to life the challenge that we're facing at OpenGI, explain the disruption and volatility that that's creating, and really explore the opportunities that provides, and there are genuine opportunities. And what I hope to do at the end of it is give you a sense of actually what I think the key attributes are for the capabilities of the business. But I'm also quite interested in what it means for me as a leader and what learnings I've had, because I am facing that personal disruption as well as the market and organizational disruption. So if we could move on again, that would be great. Yeah, so as Stephen said, I know I don't look it, but I've actually been doing this for 30 years. I joined Aviva's graduate scheme in '91, and I grew up through an amazing development program at Aviva. I also spent some time working on secondment at a large retail bank, and genuinely have seen real change and real opportunity through that. What I would say though is, as I referenced it, what I would also recognize is from that point, and then my move into technology 10, 11 years ago with Avello, where we sold the business after 3 years, and then I have spent a further 7 or 8 years working for a global software business, learning how to build, deploy, scale modern, agile software that drives real partnership. Is that actually I am constantly challenged with that learning, that fact of life that is what you've learned before, much of which was valid at the time, is now in desperate need of change, and we have to personally embrace that. Equally for OGI, which also has been around for over 30 years, it has built up a very successful business in all its component parts over the last 30 years by building and deploying very solid technology solutions, supported by some excellent people, which has meant it has taken a very positive and strong position in the general insurance value chain. It's basically what OGI does, just to give you that sense, is we build policy administration software, which through extremely strong and powerful integrations and through enablement through digital capability and data, enables the general insurance value chain to be as effective as possible, to deliver real value, real opportunities to our broker partners through having positive connections with the insurance companies and also other members of the ecosystem, all of whom are focused on delivering benefit to the end consumer, whether that's in the personal lines insurance space or in the commercial lines insurance space. The reality is that, again, similar to myself, what it has been doing over the last 30 years, which has made it successful, will not make it successful in the future. And so we are seeing organizational disruption. And of course, what we operate within is the general insurance market, which, whilst historically has been quite slow to change, we're now starting to see really powerful forces of change, which will result in whether, and let me give you a bit of sense of that, they will be regulatory change, they will be technology change, they will be consumer change, as in most industries. And what that means is the whole market is going to be disrupted. People will consume insurance differently. People will want to use technology differently. People will want to have different and more high quality relationships with their customers. That that is going to drive disruption. So what we're seeing is that for OpenGI, the value that has been built up over those 30 years, which is amazing value, and that is both financial and value in the relationships we have, will melt over time. It won't be a quick melting of the iceberg, but it will happen over time, unless we start to think, operate, deliver, and lead differently. So the challenge that we've got is, how do we retain the amazing value of the 30 years of the business, where we have built up those relationships, where we've built up that position within our marketplace, while starting to build the future, started to build what will inevitably be the way we will operate in the future. So that's the challenge. So if we could move on again, Danny, that would be great. So if I look at what have I been trying to do as a leader? I've been trying to peel back the onion. I've been trying to understand at a root cause what are causing our undesirable effects. And ultimately, the undesirable effects are that we are not growing as fast as we should. We are not delivering to our customers in the way we should. And that means that actually there are a number of what I think are primary indicators of delivery. And let's be clear, our primary purpose is to deliver amazing software that enables our customers to transform their businesses and constantly benefit from the power of that technology. And so if we align everything back to that purpose, what we've seen is, over the last few years, acquisitions that we have made, organizational design that we have implemented, has resulted in us not being able to do that as effectively as we would have wanted to. We've had to divert resource, we've had to focus in certain areas, and that has resulted in a weakening of our position. I think we've also culturally lost sight of the customer, which can often happen when you're overpowered by the challenges of delivering software. And I think that there's also a challenge around the fact that the leadership team and the people in the OGI business who have huge domain knowledge and strong capability haven't necessarily got the skills and capabilities to build the future. So our challenge is to look at org design, look at leadership, look at our people, and recognize, similar to the challenge of product and process, how do we retain all of the knowledge and skills that are going to be important and still important, whilst building the new capabilities that will enable us to become the organization of the future. And I think what we ultimately want to do is change our market and brand perception, and I'll come back to that. Again, if we can move on, Danny. So why pivot? And I know this is I'm always nervous of using shiny new phrases that everybody trolleys out. The reality is that the business has to build a new platform for growth, and that's a technological thing, but it's also an organizational capability thing and a cultural thing. We have to deploy new ways of doing things and have to get new methodologies, new processes, all encapsulated in a culture that is about partnership and customer. We've had to recognize, and look, I know that this is a Thoughtworks session, but genuinely, for many businesses in the situation we're in, we can't fix this on our own. And I think one of the strong aspects of leadership in the future is a humility to recognize when you need help. But you need help from the right sort of partners. You need people who are your critical friend. I think the world is full of sycophants. What you sometimes need is somebody to say, you're going in the wrong direction, you're making the wrong choices, you need to do things differently. And that's what we've got with our partnership model with Thoughtworks, and that's genuinely felt. We've also had an overlay, which I haven't actually mentioned yet, I can't believe, which in the midst of doing all these things, and we would actually literally agreed to kick off the work we are now doing in terms of transforming the business, and COVID hit. And that has been huge. And I don't need to tell everybody on this video call that, but what I have seen for us is that, you cannot escape the tragedy of COVID and the impacts it's having on people's lives. And I would not demean that. I would not belittle that. But for us as a business, we've had to learn really quickly how to work remotely, how to work flexibly, how to trust each other, and how to work in a truly collaborative way. And that's what COVID has helped us to do. And we've done that very effectively. We've also had to recognize capacity and capability. The business and changing the business, as a leader, one of the true innate skills you need is to recognize the pace and speed of change. And at what point does change overwhelm individuals and teams, and think differently about change. I think the other ingredient, which I am extremely positive about, and I think is a key ingredient, is you need to have support from your investors, whoever they are. And we've all got different capital structures, but in my case, my PE owners have been extremely supportive, and without that, it would have made the job much harder. So that's the kind of context. So if we move on one more slide, what I'll tweet you through is some diagnostics we did. So we kind of needed to understand culture. Just to be clear, I do not see culture as a hit, as a kind of tree hugging thing, as a kind of it's something that has real value. The way an organization operates, its cultural attributes is so key. And what we've had to do is to recognize again that the strengths that we have in our culture around relationships, around domain knowledge, around actual real passion for what we do, there were also some areas that needed to change. We had lost our reputation in some areas for being really easy to do business with and to getting things done. We'd become very siloed, which I think is quite common. And as a result, the waste that was in our flow, in our systems, is and was extremely high. As I said earlier, we kind of lost sight of how important it is that we have real partnership relationships, that we recognize the value of our customers. And I think that will play through a bit when I give you some of the feedback from the brand. Our customers of all sizes have said to me, it feels like working with a utility where you're just exploiting your position in the network. But the good news is, our people want it to be different, and we've seen that in a number of engagement exercises we've done. Our customers also want it to be done to be different, and we have huge levels of inherent goodwill for this business, which we need to build upon. And I also think for all of us, we need to just get excited again about being a tech company and for building amazing software, and seeing our customers and our people benefit from doing that. If we could move on, that would be good. Quite minded of time. So just quickly, we also want to talk to our customers through a brand audit. I won't read that slide, but it was a pretty extensive sample. It was a pretty intensive exercise, and the messaging has been really clear. So if we can move on again, Danny. The good news, and genuinely it is good news, the overwhelming feedback is that the essence of our brand, the trustworthy, the reliability, the position we've held is actually a strength, right? However, we've become, and I'm not sure this is where we wanted to get to. And it's interesting how sometimes there are unintended consequences of some of the decisions you make as a leader that we're seen as a necessary evil, or as I put in my title, like a pair of old slippers, which is, it's comfortable, you know what you're getting, but we're not seen as innovative. We're not seen as sassy. We're not seen as a tech business, and we're certainly not seen as a partner. So what that says to me is, despite the challenge that presents, I am very, very, very clear, actually, that from a position of inherent brand strength, we need to just refresh and re-energize our promise to the market and our delivery to the market, and we need to represent our brand in a different way, and that's what we're going to do. And we need then to deliver against that brand promise. Okay, thank you. Can we move on? We've also spent a lot of time looking at ourselves and considering our role as leaders. I genuinely believe that one of the biggest changes in leadership is a genuine commitment to humility and selflessness, and probably more important than that, authenticity. So what we've actually did through the diagnostic work we did with the Thoughtworks guys, who I have to say, the likes of Mel and Dill have been extremely challenging in this space, is to ask ourselves some questions about how we lead and to understand what perceptions we have of our leadership. And it was interesting during this exercise that when we scored ourselves, we actually scored ourselves lower than the way our people scored us. And that's good. But if I have any experience of high performance teams, it's that they're really demanding of themselves and of each other. So that's a good place to start. Okay, can we move on? So what we've tried to do, we've tried to distill all of that down, and we synthesize that into a message that we could give internally and externally that very simply articulates what we're going to do. And for me, we need to make it clear that our goal is to be the technology partner and employer of choice in the UK general insurance market. We want that. We recognize the very strong correlation between those two things. Very, very strong people capability who are happy and motivated in what they do, deliver to their customers and build partnerships. It's pretty simple. We have to recognize through that strategy that the inherent value of the existing businesses and the existing platforms and the existing customers needs to be protected. It needs to be protected and energized. We need to give everybody confidence that there is a future for people on those platforms, and that is what we will do. But we equally need to invest in building new platforms, new capabilities, and provide a technology solution that ultimately can meet the needs of the market and can become the dominant force in the new way that general insurance is distributed. So those are really the important parts. We have some specific winning steps. Why? Because you'll see in a minute, I think discipline is extremely important. In a business like this, you have to be really clear on those 5 or 6 absolute must-do things. And you have to align resource, align focus. And as a leader, and I'll talk a bit about this in a minute, you can't operate in, gone are the days when you can be in the chateau 20 miles behind the front with a nice bottle of claret and some cheese. You've got to be at the front. You've got to be there. You've got to see and in the work. And so for each of these activities, we're very much focused as a leadership team on ensuring that we show personal leadership and responsibility. However, the one thing I would also say is, and we've seen this, the winning step around simplifying the business is we're doing some work with systems thinking at the moment where we really understand failure, value and failure demand, and we're energizing change in our business, and we're changing culture by enabling people to actually recognize the things that we do day in, day out, which make absolutely no sense. So actually, the cultural change that we're talking about will not be a top-down happy clappy exercise. It will be actually driven by real things and real and us as a leadership team encouraging people to change the business, take risk, fail, learn, and hopefully have a giggle. So that's what we're trying to do. But of course, this all has to deliver real and valuable outcomes. So we are very mindful that the measures that we have in our business, which we are currently changing, need to show that what we're doing is having a positive effect on the business. Okay, Danny, do you want to move on? So I think I've talked through these things. I think what I would say is the must-win battle that we are working with Thoughtworks on, and I have to say this is been a very interesting and rewarding experience, is that not only do we need actual capability to deliver code and architect the code, but we need to learn, and we need to build exemplar teams, exemplar individuals into our business, and then we need to spread that, and we will create that, if I may use the word viral, which probably is not good right now, but I think change happens most positively when it's viral, by people looking over the fence into those programs and going, I really like what they're doing over there. I think I might try it. And we're seeing examples of that. So the Mobius team, the way we've got momentum and traction now, the way we're seeing that being built is hugely positive. But I also, you will see in there that what these must-win battles are all about is being really clear on that combination of building the future and protecting the existing value of the business. That is so key. What I would say is I probably have attended sessions like this myself, and I make this sound really easy. This has been incredibly challenging, and I think, like many businesses who are in this position, and I think there are a number who are in the same position as us, and actually where COVID has accelerated the need for transformational change, the ability to manage those multiple programs of work is extremely challenging, and takes an awful lot of effort, and most importantly, takes learning. I think the thing that I would also say that is really important is, when I mentioned earlier about capacity and capability, you really have to understand the root causes of the problems that you're trying to fix, and you really then have to understand the capabilities that are required to fix them. And what you cannot do is deploy into those complex problems people who haven't got the skills and haven't got the knowledge, because all you are doing is setting them up for failure, which is really tough. You have to create an environment where people can win, where people can succeed. And by doing that, you have to make choices, and you have to align resources to these battles. And I think that brings me nicely on to probably the most important thing about agile and adaptive leadership is your appetite to learn as an individual, as a leader. And if I move on to the last slide, what I would play back to you is what I've experienced, is the comment I made at the beginning, which is, it's actually quite hard, and everybody who's in the middle of this problem is at different points in their careers and different points in their learning. For many of the people like me who've spent 30 odd years doing what they're doing, you start from a point of recognizing your need to learn, and your need to change, and your need to be different. And I think the starting point of that is, gone are the days where leaders sit in a room and dictate and direct and sit in their offices and people trundle in with an MI report, and those days are gone, right? Leaders are not perfect, and we are certainly not all seeing. And the sooner we recognize that and unleash the power that exists in our business and give the people closest to the work the opportunity to drive the change, I think we'll all get there quicker. Equally, you can't be superficial. You've got to get into the root cause, and it's got to be data driven. I really try very hard. I have I think quite a healthy relationship between my head and my heart, but I challenge myself all the time to be data driven. I think I've talked about capacity and capability. I think for change to happen, you have to understand the rate at which your business can change, and there will be a cadence of change, and that will be linked directly to the quality of that change. And what we have found is there are a number of complex changes we can do at any one time, and we have to take them in chunks, and we have to make the change, we have to test the change, we have to embed the behaviors, and we have to follow that cycle. For me as a leader, I've got to spend equal amounts of time on the balcony, on the dance floor. Even though I've talked about being in the work, I need to be careful not to get in the way. I don't understand the problem at a detailed level often. So I've just got to create an environment where people can fix the problems. It might be just unblocking stuff. It might be encouraging, whatever. But I also have to spend time up on the balcony looking at the system conditions, looking at what's actually going on across the whole flow, and make sure that, because of the silo nature of many of our businesses, that we're not just fixing a problem in a specific area, we are addressing the systemic issues. And I think the final thing, and I think I'm bang on time, which is good news, is I know we all say this, but we are actually only here once, and it's got to be fun. And I think for me personally, the key driver is about looking back on the time that you've spent doing this with pride and thinking that you've left the business in a better position. And I think those would be my key learnings. And I think that's it, Danny, if you could move me on. Yep, that's it. So, Stephen, I'll hand back to you. Hopefully that was okay.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. It was super interesting and genuinely brilliant to hear you sharing, I guess, what certainly for me felt such an honest account of your experiences, the challenges and the things that you've learned along the way. I'll now open the session up for questions. We've already had a few questions coming throughout the presentation, and to everyone online, we'll try and answer them all, time permitting. Just a reminder for those who want to ask a question, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. But if we start with the first question that came through, which is, you were speaking about a successful business needing to change. Were there people within your business with the, well, if it isn't broken, why do we need to fix it attitude? And I guess that leads to an implied question, which is, and how did you address that if that was happening?
So the overwhelming reaction we've had to this has been extremely positive. And OGI has a huge number of people who've worked within it with long-standing careers and long-standing, and so you're right. There's probably an assumption that those individuals are going to be quite nervous of rocking the boat and changing things. What we've actually found is the contrary. We've seen people who actually care. And this is often the danger with leadership, isn't it? They've seen what's gone on. They've seen the direction the business has gone in. They've seen the mistakes that have been made, and desperately want it to be different. So on the whole, the reaction has been extremely positive. Honestly, Stephen, of course, there are going to be, we're moving people's, what's the phrase? We're moving people's cheese around here, right? And I tend to find everybody's cool with cheese being moved around unless it's theirs that gets moved around. So there are always challenges. There are always people who are concerned by the impact of that. And I believe the only way you address that is through communication and engagement, and by explaining your reasons and helping people to see that ultimately that is for the greater good of the business. I tend to use the phrase "the greater good" quite a lot these days, and it's turning into a Simon Pegg film. So, but we do talk about the greater good quite a lot.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got another question. It kind of leads on from that, which is, many leaders sometimes view change as a finite exercise. And is that the case with OGI, or do you see a new normal? I mean, we're talking about seeing opportunity in changing realities. So how have your staff embraced the culture and role changes if there is a new normal here?
I think it's been hard for all of us, hasn't it, Stephen? We talk about this new normal, and we can talk about it as quite flippant, in a quite flippant way. The reality is that when I started work, the pace of change, the life cycle of change was much longer, and it was much easier. I mean, whilst it may have been a bit dull at times, it was much easier to cope with. It feels to me right now there isn't any part of what we do and how we operate, and I'm talking about organizationally and socially, that isn't changing. So there are people in the business, Stephen, who are finding this level of change and the impact of it and this new normal really hard to think about and to deal with. If we talk about COVID, there has been huge benefits to remote working and flexible working for a whole bunch of people, including me. But actually, there are downsides to that in terms of social interaction, team working, communication. And so what I think we've got to always do is consider at each stage, what are we learning, and what are the, that test and learn is constantly going on to try and understand whether what we're seeing is positive or not, and to quickly change where it's not having the desired outcome.
Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, I guess leading on from that, we've got another question, which actually I'm quite interested in myself, which is, you talked about actually, and probably using another much overhyped phrase, but the majority of people in your organization, from the sounds of things, are leaning into this change. But on a difficult transformation journey, what personality types do you tend to look for as positive catalysts to I guess, accelerate the opportunity for change?
Yeah, we do use lots of those phrases, don't we? I think what's hardest about some of this is that we talked earlier about the unpredictability and the volatility and the disruptive nature of this stuff. And you can see that at a personal and an organizational level as quite challenging. What I look for are people that recognize that actually this presents to them a whole bunch of development. One of the most common characteristics I actually see is that people want to make a difference. They want to make it. Actually, we get out of bed in the morning, and I think the opportunity to make a difference, the opportunity to be part of something that positively changes the business is huge. But we also have to recognize there are some people who are very comfortable with the status quo and doing and operating as they always have. So I think this is about leadership. It's about communication. It's about coaching. And the attributes I look for selflessness. I look for humility, and I look for an ability to deal with the challenge. And I think we need high levels. We need to be able to cope with that, and I guess that mental strength to be able to deal with that is important.
Thanks. And I think in your experiences as you described, that you are finding those within OpenGI, which I think you must be very proud of. One of the questions we've got, and I guess it stems from you made a statement about knowing when to ask for help. And having the humility, I guess, to know when to ask for help. Why do you think organizations struggle to do technology change themselves? And how did you know to bring in a partner?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's sometimes hard when you're in the middle of let me use that battle phrase again, when you're in the middle of it day in, day out, to take that step back and go, actually, what we're doing here is we're not fixing this problem. We're not making progress. We're actually probably in some situations making it worse. And I think what you need as a leader is to, and we are built often to just keep going, aren't we? Many of us don't want to admit defeat and don't want to give up on stuff. I don't want to ask for help. I think you've got to, in the first instance, recognize the signs and the indicators of progress and real progress, and be alive to stuff that isn't getting fixed. And then you've got to, that's the point, I think. And that's what happened with us. We had a bunch of very committed people working extremely hard, and actually we weren't getting closer to the finishing line. That tells me that something's going on, and that's the time to have the conversation with a trusted partner, with a critical friend. And I think that what I'd say, Stephen, is though that you've got to believe that the person you go and speak to doesn't just have another vested interest in an outcome that suits them. They've got to be as authentic and humble as you. That's what you need, right?
Yeah, spot on. There are two more questions, probably just before we need to wrap up, and they're kind of along the same theme. I mean, for everybody who's online, I had the opportunity to obviously prepare with Simon ahead of today, and your passion comes through about what you're doing, about what your teams are doing, and what the potential is for your organization. How do you go about sharing that passion with your team, and how do you know that they're embracing it? Do they embrace it?
There's a few things. I also recognise, by the way, Stephen, that my passion can be my weakness as well. Just to be clear. So there are times when my passion and energy. So what I've done much more with AGI is I have to sustain this energy. I am absolutely committed to this chain. I love what I'm doing, and I love the people that I'm working with, but I have to sustain my energy. So what I try to do is try and do it through very authentic means. I spend time with people. I'm genuinely interested in what people are doing. I care about people, and I mean that. And I want them to do well. I want our business to do well. I don't particularly do grand gestures. I'm doing this today, I suppose, but I don't particularly like that sort of royal visit stuff. I hate it, but I like spending time with people, and saying thank you and recognizing contribution, and with my team in particular, let's be clear, there are days when I'm extremely demanding. So I'm sure there's days when they go home and they're sticking pins in effigies of me, but I believe in what we're doing, and I believe we have to demand more of each other. And I think I do that from the right place.
Yeah. And I think it's those little acts of recognition and kindness and care that kind of really carry that through. Okay, and I guess the last question is kind of carrying on a theme, because when you talk about the environment of OpenGI, it does start to sound very much like a high trust, high performing team environment. So how do you go about building trust within your organization, and how do you make them believe in the change?
So let me be clear, it hasn't been a high trust environment. And I think that comes out of silos, that comes out of lots of different conditions, system conditions to create that. I think building trust is one of the hardest things to achieve. And the only way to do it is to have honest conversations. And it's the hardest thing for people to do because we are not conditioned to do that. Does that answer your question, Stephen? Or is
I think it does. I'm going to have to wrap it up there, but there is one last question, and I think it's one I'd like to answer if we can quickly answer it, which is, as a leader of undertaking huge changes, as a business leader undertaking huge changes, what emotional impact does it have?
Quite a lot. Yeah, I mean, because it depends. I suppose it depends what sort of leader you are, doesn't it? I mean, but for me, as a leader, where I take very seriously my role and the contribution and impact I have, I worry. I can be a bit of a worrier, and I worry about outcomes and people. So, there are times when, it can cause you not to sleep at night. It can cause you to wake up in a cold sweat and worry about what's going to happen. But I also have learned over the years that the way to deal with that is to get good people around you who are all committed to the same outcome. And it's funny, coming into technology, which I think is the hardest environment personally, there's been times when I felt problems were unresolvable, but you know what? Good people find a way. And that's the way you manage that emotional impact, by having people around who you can trust.
Right. And it becomes, a virtuous cycle in that case. Well, look, with that last question, I think I'll draw today's session to a close. Thank you so much for joining us today, Simon, and for such an insightful presentation. And thank you to everyone for joining us this week. We truly hope that you found the sessions insightful, and we're looking forward to welcoming you again at Thoughtworks Live next year. Keep well and stay safe.